The major abiotic components are the factors. So one of the important factor is soil. So what is meant by the soil means it is a mixture of organic materials and minerals, gases, so liquids and microorganisms. So these are the components of the soil. The soil is forming, so organic materials are presented, dead organic materials are presented, and mineral ions are presented. Some of the gases are, air is presented, and liquid, water is presented, and microbes, different categories of the microbes, and some smaller animals are presented. So they are having the habitat of the soil only. So like this, all these are the components of the soil. So by this component, soil is favoring to their habitat of the microorganism. So this is called the soil biology. Then soil, how it is forming. The soil formation is called, or the study of the soil is called pedology. The study of soil is called pedology. The formation of the soil or the soil studies or the soil zone. Soil zone in the atmosphere is called pedosphere. The soil zone is called pedosphere. The formation of the soil. How the soil is going to forming is. So rocks are going to weathering here. The rocks are going to weathering. So when the rocks are going to weathering, they are forming the sand particles or soil particles. So soil particles are going to forming, so by the weathering of rocks. So this weathering process may occur again into the two forms, that is microbial weathering process or mechanical weathering process here. Whether we are taking the weathering process, the formation of the soil particles we are taking. So mechanical weathering means either by the air, water or chemicals. So by these physical factors, the rocks are going to modified as a sand or the soil particle, that is called as a physical weathering process. And the biological weathering process is conducted by the microbes. Microbes here. Microbial activity like that as a fungi and algae. So like that, these together are lichens we are taking. So these together we call as the lichens. By the activity of the lichens, the microbial process is forming into the from the rocks to the weathering process is conducted and the soil is going to form. So this is a process is, the total this process is called pedogenesis. So pedogenesis here. The study of the soil is called as a pedology, and the soil zone is called as a pedosphere, and the formation or the process of the soil or the soil particles is called as a pedogenesis. Earlierly, that means the raw materials or initial materials for the soil particles, soil formation is rocks only. So from the rocks to whatever the soil particles they are forming, so those are called embryonic soil. Those particles or those sand particles are called embryonic soil. Initially produced soil material here. So later on it is going to mixing with the all these components like that is organic matter, minerals, gases, liquids, and some of the microbes are going to adding into the soil we are taking. So this is into the formation of the soil. According to the soil we are taking. The soil features of the soil we are taking means features of soil. How the soil is supporting into the life. So soil have some features. They are soil is able to provide the medium, the growth medium for plants. So plants are growing into the soil medium only. Soil providing the medium. So to grow the plants, soil act as a medium. So all the required minerals, water, so whatever the requiring substances are needed for the plant growth, all those are going to provided by the soil. So this is a one specific feature, and soil is able to storage and purification of water. Soil is able to storage, the water is stored into the soil, and the purification. So the water is going to purify by pass on into the different layers of the soil we are taking. So this is the second one we are taking. So second feature. And soil is providing the habitat for number of organisms. So number of organisms. So soil provides the habitat for the number of microorganisms or the smaller organisms we are doing, like that as a so earthworms, insects, those are all living into the soil only. So soil, these are the basic features of the soil. So by these features, these are the basic features. So it provides into the medium for the plant growth and stores into the water and the purification, and it provides into the habitat here. And not only that, the soil is having some characteristics they are having into the soil. That is, they are the soil, first one, soil texture here. So soil texture. Whether you are taking into the soil, soil profile, soil is arranged, soil profile we are taking. So whether you are taking the section of the soil, soil is arranged into a number of layers. Whether we are going into the horizontally, the different layers are presented to the soil we are taking. So example O, E, A, B, C and R. So like this, a different number of layers are presented into the soil profile we are taking. So the O is the outermost or the surface layer, which is rich with the organic matters, and the E is the second sublayer. It is rich with the alluvial particles. Alluvial means mineral ions, those are presented into the E. And whether you are taking into the A smaller rocks and the sand particles, so soils, they are presented into the A. And the B and the C, here it is into the light layer, and the B and the C we are taking means the innermost layers which are having a small size of the rocks, minerals, so metal ions are presented into the B and the C. The innermost layer is called as R, so it is having a solid rocky structure. So like this, the soil profile we are taking means there are different types of the layers are going to form. In that, the soil texture. So here, this property we are consider in this layer, the surface layer of the soil. So soil texture is basically depends on the size of soil particles. Size of soil particles we are there. So the soil particles, so based on the soil particle, soil into the different types. They are the sand, slit soil and the clay soil here. Sand, slit and the clay soil. So that means the particles are becomes into the somewhat bigger. That soil is forming the sand soil. So medium they are forming the slit soil, not into the completely the sand and not completely into the clay. So mediumly they are forming means the particles slit soil. So a minute particles are forming, the soil particles are forming, that is forming into the clay soil here. So like this, the soil texture is basically depends on the size of the particles here. So these are going to variating. So sand, so one soil to the next soil. Next characters or next feature of the soil we are taking soil porosity. So what is mean by the porosity means the space which is presented. So space between the soil particles. The space which is present in the soil particle. So this space is called pore space here. Pore space. So between into the soil. So whether we are taking the soil particle in between into the, so any two are the soil particles, some space is arranged or some space is forming with air. So this space is called as a pore space here. So whether we are taking one particular volume of the soil, the ratio between into the volume of soil and pore space here. The ratio between into the volume of the soil and the pore space in a particular, so volume of the soil and their pore space, this ratio is called as a porosity. So this is called as a porosity of the soil. How it is influencing the porosity, how it is going to influencing the environment means, so the porosity, based on the porosity only, the water permeability or the water holding capacity of the soils are so going to determine here. The porosity becomes into the more means water permeability is the more here. Next factor, that one only we are going to discuss. So this is regarding to the porosity. The porosity is nothing but as the space between into the soil here. Here next factor, soil permeability. Soil permeability. So what is meant by the soil permeability means the movement of water. So the movement of water in soil particles. In soil particles. Here already we discussed between into the soil particles, the space is forming. So this space already we given the name of the pore space here. So whenever the pore space is going to increasing, the water molecules are very easily they are pass on or they are floating in between into the soil particle here. So this movement of the water and this characteristic of the soil is called as a soil permeability. So the more space or the more porosity containing the soils are, so more permeability they are showing. The less space or the less porosity containing soils are showing in the less permeability. That means the permeability of the soil is directly proportional to here. So soil permeability the soil porosity is directly proportional to permeability here. So permeability. The same way, soil porosity is indirectly proportional to water holding capacity. Capacity we are taking water holding capacity. That means the porosity becomes into the more, that time the soil particles, the holding of the water is less here. So between the gaps are becomes into the more, means water molecules are not holded into the larger spaces. So the spaces becomes into the minute, that time it is forming into the water holding capacity is going to increase. So like this, the permeability, the porosity and the permeability is interconnected here. They are directly proportional here. So these are into the another two characteristics of the soil. Next, another factor is soil temperature. Soil getting a certain temperature from solar radiation. The major temperature, so soil getting the major content of the temperature from the solar radiation here. So this is the source of the soil temperature. And not only that, organic matter composition process. So whenever the microbes are going to decomposing the organic material, some amount of the heat is going to releases into the soil. And inner heat of soil. So soil itself and earth itself, the inner layers are forming some amount of the heat. So these are the basic sources of the soil temperature here. Then what is the importance, why we are going to study it into the soil temperature? Means, so based on the soil temperature only, seed germination, root growth, decomposition. So these are the basic factors, or the important factors are going to depends on the temperature of the soil. And not only these, so even though the organism, those who are going to living into the soil, based on the temperature only, they are going to survive. So that means the seeds are growing into a particular temperature. That optimum temperature is maintained by the soil, then only the seeds are going to growing. Or the root growth. So root development and the growth are decomposing organisms. They are going to well developed, and the decomposing process is conducted into the optimum temperature. So like this, the soil temperature is also important factor into the soil features we are taking. Next one, soil water. Soil water. So soil water not only to the solvent here. It is not only the solvent, and it is not only the solvent and the transformating agent here. See, it is not only the solvent and the transformating agent. Soil water means whatever the water content which is presented into the soil, that is called as the soil water. So how it is going to act on the environment means it is act as a solvent. That means all the minerals into the soil particles, they are going to dissolve into the water molecule. It is not only into the solvent and the transformating agent. So certain particles are going to transformating. So from one place to the other place with the soil water only. So not only these two factors, soil water not only conducting these two characters, and it is also giving it the soil texture. The soil texture is basically depends on the soil water only, and compact nature of soil particle. So compacticity or the compact close arrangement of the soils are going to, so form soil particles are going to influencing by the soil water. So like this, the basic and the important characteristics are forming into the different characteristics are forming into the soil. So they are the soil water and the soil temperature we are taking. Next one, this is the regarding to the soil. Next, another factor, another abiotic factor, that is wind. Wind. So wind is nothing but as a air only. Air. The flow of the air is called as a wind. So how this air or the wind is migrating, and what is the importance of the wind means, wind is always, it is moving, the movement of air in one direction. In one direction here. So any one direction means not always into the same direction. So any one direction here, the air is continuously, it is moving. So that is called as a wind. And how the wind is forming, air flow, how it is forming means, because of the two factors, they are the equatorial and polar temperature differences here. So equatorial and the polar region temperature differences are influencing into the wind or the airflow, and rotation of earth. So because these two factors are the major. So equatorial, the polar, two different regions. These two geographical regions, temperature difference are making into the airflow, and the rotation of the earth. So the rotation of the earth is also making the influencing into the airflow here. Wind is going to influence it. So like this, the wind is floating or air is floating. So any one direction. And what is the importance of the wind in the ecosystem or the environment means, the wind participating in the pollination process. Wind is participating in the pollination process. So that means these are major factor in the organism, the ecosystem. So without pollination, so there is no organism, there is no food material is provided into the ecosystem here. Pollination is carried out into the wind, and the birds. So birds are flying. The birds flighting of the birds are supported by the wind here. So pollination, birds flying process, and availability of oxygen. Availability is conducting by the wind flow. So these are the basic important factors, functions of the wind flow or the air flow we are taking. So this is also one of the major factor, so in the abiotic factors of the ecosystem we are taking. So next one, so those are the most important importances of the wind flow. And wind not only there, so it is also transporting the seeds and particles here, and it is a basic energy source here. So the wind source, nowadays we are going to using the conventional energy sources. One of the basic source is the wind here, and wind, the high speed airflow or the wind is causing the soil erosion. So soil erosion is causing by the wind flow here. So these are the characteristics of the wind and the wind flow we are taking. Next one is the humidity. So next abiotic factor is the humidity. So humidity is nothing but as a moisture of invisible vapor. So the moisture of invisible vapor. In the atmosphere, whatever it is invisibly, that means we are not going to identify, we are not going to see. So that invisible water vapor is called, so that moisture is called humidity. So humidity we are going to, so recognizing, we are going to identifying or measuring into the two processes, that the actual humidity relative humidity, or it is also called as a specific humidity here. So actual humidity and relative or the specific humidity. So what is meant by the actual humidity? Humidity means actual humidity. Here it is the amount of water vapor. The amount of water vapor is present in unit air. So the amount of water vapor presented in the unit air. In the unit air here. Here we are not going to consider into the temperature. That means the temperature loss or the temperatures, the satisfaction of the temperature we are not going to consider. The total amount of the mass of the water vapor which is presented in the one unit area is called as a actual humidity. And relative humidity or the specific humidity means relative humidity or specific humidity means here this is the ratio of or the amount of vapor is present in unit area. Here some amount of the water vapor is saturating into the temperature here. So after the saturation of the temperature, this is the amount of the water vapor present in unit area after saturation of temperature. So that means some amount of the water or water vapor is going to saturated by the temperature. That means to reducing the temperature, some amount will be utilized here. The remaining water vapor, the water mixture, whatever it is presented into the air or the atmosphere, that is called as a relative humidity. Generally the relative humidity we are going to measuring into the percentages here. So this is regarding generally, so actual humidity we are going to consider the total amount of the water vapor, and relative humidity, so we are taking into the after the saturation how much amount of the water vapor is presented, so that is taking as a relative humidity. So this is measuring as, or this is representing as a percentage here. And the measuring of the humidity is done by the hygrometer here. Hygrometer. So with the help of the hygrometer, so whether you are taking the airflow or the wind, we are going to measuring anemometer. So like that, the humidity we are going to measure by the hygrometer here. So this is the another important factor, abiotic factor of ecosystem. So next factor is altitude here. So altitude, this is the factor of elevation or gradient. So it is a factor of elevation or the gradient. So that means from the surface of the earth to whenever we are going to moving towards into the upper side, so that is called increasing of the altitude here. So the altitude is going to increasing, temperature is going to decreasing here. Whether from the sea levels or the ground levels to whenever we are going to increasing into our height, that means the levels are going to increasing, height is going to increasing, the gradient is going to increasing, automatically temperatures are going to decreasing here. So how it is influencing into the organism, altitude, how it is going to influencing the organism means, so whenever we are going to higher altitudes, oxygen demand, oxygen pressure in higher altitudes are going to decreases. That means the oxygen demand, it is going to increases into the organism. It is going to increases into the organism here. Generally, the changes into the environment, organisms you are taking means, at any one person, they are going to migrate it from the surface, the lower altitude to the higher altitudes. So the persons are going to forming the adaptation. So that means a short duration of environmental changes, organism forming adaptations. So organisms are forming the adaptation. So this is a process is called acclimatization process. This is a process is called acclimatization process. So this acclimatization, the organisms are showing into this adaptation, acclimatization process are showing. So how it is means, suppose any one person is moving from the lower altitude to higher altitude, automatically after the few days to withstand or to stabilize into that new habitat, so to withstand into that new habitat, so that person's RBC is going to increase it. That person's RBC is going to increase. That is, number of RBC in their body is going to increase. Why these are going to increase in that particular person means, from the lower altitudes, we are taking, the temperature is the less, and so oxygen available, the oxygen pressure is becomes into the more here. Oxygen availability is becomes into the more. But when we are taking the higher altitudes, the temperature is the less, and oxygen pressure is in the less, and oxygen demand is the more here. So that only, so the RBC content, the number of RBC is going to rise. So whether you are taking into the higher altitudes, even though rain is also not forming, rain instead of the rain, so there we are going to identify only into the snow. So lower altitudes, generally whenever the climate condensation is occurs, water vapor is going to condense, we are getting into the rains. But the higher altitudes we are take means there the rain is absent because the temperatures are becomes into the very low. So there they are forming into the snow only. So like the higher altitudes we are take means so low temperatures are presented and the low pressure of the oxygen and the high demand of the oxygen. So in their body RBC is going to increases here. So like this the altitudes also making some effect into the organism and their habitat and their survivability where. So like this, all these are into the abiotic components or the abiotic factors which are influencing the ecosystem.